4 cards revealed this morning for the Boomsday expansion. First up is Dr. Morrigan, 8 mana 5/5 legendary warlock minion with the Death Rattle. Swap this with a minion from your deck. So this Death Rattle is basically like recruit a minion, but you'll also be able to draw and play this card multiple times. You're paying the 8 mana now, but if you build your deck right, the Death Rattle should summon you a big minion well worth the cost, and you can do this again and again. While I could see this card working in a big warrior, Warlock doesn't really have the heal, removal, and Dead Man's Hand value to support this card. There is the Baleful Banker Umbra combo idea that causes a continuous loop of Dr. Morrigan summoning itself, and this doesn't really get you anywhere with this card, but it will be interesting to see what happens with that. It's not a card I'd recommend crafting, but it's another powerful Death Rattle revealed this expansion, so we'll see if any decks can try to take advantage of it, and what cards in the future will support Dr. Morrigan. Next up is Galvanizer, 2 mana 1/2 mech with the battlecry, reduce the cost of mechs in your hand by 1. This is similar to the wild card Mech Warper, but its effect is actually a bit more powerful. Usually a 2/3 doesn't stay on the board long enough to get more than 1 or 2 mechs out, so being able to reduce your hand will likely get you more value. With this card, you're sacrificing initial tempo due to the card's stats, but because of its cheap price, you can easily combo this with one of your bigger, now cheaper mechs. And you can also use the 1/2 stat lines more effectively by magnetizing to this minion. In a fast tempo mech deck, Galvanizer could see play, but I think it needs to hit 2 or 3 mechs consistently. It's going to be a balance between this card's stats, the consistency of the battlecry reward, and how fast the deck wants to get mechs out on the board. I think it's really tough to know for sure if Galvanizer will see play, but I'm leaning towards being a bit doubtful. Next up is the Stormbringer, 7 mana shaman spell that transforms your minions into random legendary minions. Oh, shaman, shaman, shaman. You were doing so good printing elementals, spell-based cards, and then you pull this on me. This isn't a great card. We know from other random legendary minion cards that the effect isn't consistent. You can combo the Stormbringer with Electro Storm Surge to do absolutely nothing. And while random legendaries are inconsistent in value, do you know that they're usually better than just 1/1s? In a board filling shaman deck, one that focuses on continuous board fills of cheap minions to set up for bloodlusts, this could be a pretty decent board buff. If you're filling the board just with weak minions anyways, then the value can only go up from there, even if you transform one of your minions into a legendary 3/3. And I think a lot of the time you'll get some pretty decent stats out on the board in addition to some powerful effects. But I think the problem with this situation is this type of aggro or tempo deck that focuses on filling the board quickly probably doesn't want to play a 7 mana spell. It's a dead card in their hand most of the time when they draw it, and it's hard to line up with a full board. By then you'd rather just play Bloodlust. I expected more from the Shaman legendary spell, but I still think it could be used. If the Bloodlust aggro or tempo shaman needs a bit of value boost, the Stormbringer could be a useful card to cement their board and overpower their opponents. And last up is Prismatic Lens, 4 mana Paladin spell that draws you a minion and a spell from your deck and swaps the cost. This is really cool. Not only does drawing a minion and a spell seem pretty decent for 4 mana, but swapping these 2 costs could lead to crazy combos and always changing gameplay. You can try to use this card to get cheaper spells or minions, but it's tough to build a deck with this in mind. You can try to get Dino Size or the legendary spell for cheap, but then you're only playing smaller minions. It's maybe easier to get cheaper big minions by running a lot of Paladin's cheap spells and swapping the cost with these. But really, I don't think this card can consistently draw you any reduced cards for a combo. Instead, I just think it's a useful draw that will continue to change up the experience game to game. This would be great in a buffing Paladin where this would draw you one of your minions and buffing spells. Sometimes this makes your buffs cost more, less, or they don't change at all, but both the minion and the buff are still going to be playable. In one occasion when you use Prismatic Lens, you can Blessing of the Kings for 2 mana. In another situation, you have to wait until you have 8 mana, but now you can play Tyrion for just 4. There's going to be pros and cons to what minions and spells you draw and how that's going to affect the game. In the case of buffing Paladin, I think it's mostly going to be positive, allowing you to play buffing spells for cheaper. Drawing a spell and a minion is nice in most decks, but I'm unsure if an aggro deck will be able to spend the 4 mana to do nothing out on the board. So this may end up being draw exclusively for tempo and control. Prismatic Lens is a great idea for draw that I think is going to continue to keep games fresh. Let me know if you can think of any combos of minions and spells you can make a deck out of to take advantage of this card. I expect to see it as some nice draw for any slower Paladin deck. Those are all the cards for now. I'll be back tonight with a few more, but until then, ta-ta.